Mirroring what Anne said, thank you for all coming tonight online instead of face-to-face. It was a big change and it was last minute because I was quite determined we should get to the gallery, but they've actually even closed Willoughby Road right next to the gallery as well. So unfortunately, we couldn't make it there tonight. But I think I wanted to start tonight by just first acknowledging country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of Willoughby, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I am excited to share this night with you and to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm grateful to Willoughby Council for the space, which you're not in tonight, but hopefully you'll get to see the exhibition at some point. And the opportunity to create a community art project and to foster the arts within my local area. I've been a resident of Willoughby Council for over 30 years. I'm still a spring chicken. So I'm pleased to have this panel of amazing women with me here tonight, and I look forward to discussing the journey of self-worth, self-love and creativity. And I'd like to introduce Anne, who's already started off the evening, but Anne Buchner is a media and communications coach, a journalist and a video content producer, among many other talents. Anne is the moderator tonight, and I'll hand over to Anne to lead the discussion. Thanks, Anne.
Tracy, so much for those kind words, and also thank you so much for giving me the honour to be part of this really, really important conversation on International Women's Day. It's so wonderful, even if we couldn't be together in a room, but to be able to share the love together in a forum such as this. Before I hand over to the wonderful panel tonight, who are going to be sharing their words of wisdoms and their insights onto journeys of self-love, I thought perhaps I'd just share just a little bit of my own journey of to self-worth and self-love. And I certainly am not going to steal the thunder of those experts in the room, but I think it's interesting in the context of International Women's Day to talk about how, you know, we as women sometimes feel that we've got to a point in our lives where we kind of got it all together, and then suddenly things can sideline us, and all those doubts, all those fears, all that self-recrimination that is perhaps ingrained in us from such an early age can then just come bubbling up. Like many of us here tonight, no doubt, I think I spent so much of my life benchmarking my self-worth around what I did rather than who I was inside. And I think a lot of that was also about that sort of conditioning you get as you're growing up in terms of being like the good girl. And, you know, as a successful television producer, you know, I built a career as a television producer in a very, very male-dominated industry. You know, I was able to, you know, put a lot of self-worth around what I did with work. You know, I climbed the commercial television ladder. I traveled the world filing stories for some of Australia's most popular and high-profile TV programs. I worked with some of the biggest names in the game, and, you know, I built a big and exciting career, all the while juggling the being good in other ways. You know, I was a good daughter to my parents who were getting frail and aging. I was a good mother to my 3 beautiful daughters. I was a good partner in a marriage to, you know, a really wonderful man who was a, you know, sexy marine biologist. And I was good, and I was a good friend. And so, you know, my role was as a good worker, a good daughter, a good partner, a good mother, a good friend. And by all these measures, I think I thought I was very successful. And I felt that I was worth something because of that. And I felt I was worth something until suddenly I wasn't, you know, and by what I mean is 10 years ago, in fact, I was actually reflecting on just before we started here. It's getting now close to 11 years ago. My life was upended, and my sense of self-worth was really, really challenged when my husband died suddenly and unexpectedly from sudden cardiac arrest in his mid-40s. And, you know, the shockwaves for that were seismic. It wasn't just obviously in you know, my family dynamic. It was just that so many of the labels that I'd seen as part of myself died that day in a way. You know, so, you know, effectively my husband died, and so did my marriage. And so suddenly, you know, rather than having positive type, hanging positive things on what I did, I now sort of found myself creating these negative labels. You know, suddenly I was no longer a wife, I was a widow. I was no longer in a partnership. I was now a single mum. And very soon after that, you know, as I said, you know, and that's another thing I think, you know, like I was not only, you know, I was not only on my own, but I was a widow, or a weirdo, as some of the more unkind kids at school called, you know, taunted my youngest daughter with, you know, your mum's a weirdo because your dad's because the dad's dead. You know, kids can be terribly cruel. Anyway, so you know, and the thing is that after that, my job and my career quickly followed to a graveyard of its own, because it was impossible really to be able to, you know, look after children, look after myself in a career that took so much of me, you know, emotionally and physically, you know, the bandwidth that was actually required for that. So the job had to go, and with it so was my income. So suddenly I was a widowed, unemployed, single mother on welfare. So that was some new labels that I managed to beat myself up around with. And, you know, because suddenly I was in a position where, you know, having gone from two incomes to one income and then to no income, the whole financial security, which is so much, I think, that I'd built my self-worth on in terms of how I'd got to that point, that was taken away from them. And then, of course, through all of that, you know, I was struggling to parent three traumatized, you know, young daughters who ranged in age at that age from sort of 8 to 13, you know, very tricky kind of times of your life. And you know, and all the while trying to sort of hold them and stop myself unraveling at the time. So, you know, not only became, you know, a widowed, unemployed single mum on welfare, I was also an unemployed single mum on welfare on meds as well. So, you know, so let's just start chipping away at your sense of who you are at that. And, you know, I was no longer that sort of a happy, carefree, you know, dynamic mummy. I was kind of unhinged mummy as well. So we could add unhinged to those sorts of titles as well. And, you know, but the thing that I knew at the moment, that stage, was my, you know, really broken daughters, they needed their mum, but I also needed my mum. And of course, as fate would have it, very swiftly after my husband died, mum and dad were, you know, diagnosed with dementia, put into nursing homes, and they died as well. So then I was like, you know, a widowed, unemployed, single mum on welfare and meds, who is now an orphan. So it's amazing how we can suddenly, you know, just start pulling all these negative kind of labels on myself. And I think, you know what, at that point, you know, I had to obviously really dig deep for my family and for myself, and sort of start reinventing myself, and, you know, sort of then created a new sort of career. But, you know, as a communication coach, and started bringing everything back together there. And then, of course, because, you know, truth is stranger than fiction, and life always likes to have a little bit of a laugh at you. And if I'd been a TV producer, I would have jumped on me as a totally fantastic story, because, you know, as I said, I'm going from being the widowed single mum on welfare, on meds, and orphaned. And then suddenly I was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And so suddenly, you know, then I had another label to put on top of that. And so, you know, I was a big hot mess in a way, you know, and I felt, in terms of all that strength that I had, I was failing epically. It felt internally that I was failing epically, but for everybody else around me, it didn't seem that way. But I think the thing that finally carried me through the journey, apart from just sheer bloody mindedness, was the words of my daughters. And, you know, they didn't need labels. They didn't need me to be anything more than I was. They, you know, they needed me. Well, they said, you know, they said, we need you and we love you just as you are. And they didn't care about the labels, but to them, through that crazy white knuckle billy cart ride of a decade that we all had together, I was enough for them, and that was enough for me. So I guess that's where, you know, I'd like to, on that note, hand it over to Tracy, because I must say, when I walked into your gallery at your opening the other night, and to see that beautiful, beautiful soft sculpture on the wall that you'd put together by hand, and all those images and all those paintings that you had, which was essentially just reminding us all that, you know, we are enough, whatever sort of crazy, messed up, hot mess of a thing, or have us stuck together kind of world, we are enough. And so, you know, on that note, you know, Tracy, I'd love to hand it over to you to perhaps share what it was that brought you here and then brought us all together with you.
Wow, Anne, I don't know. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I actually got goosebumps listening to that. So that's very powerful to share women's stories. And I suppose that's part of why I'm here tonight, is to share women's stories and to inspire other women, so that they don't feel alone in their journeys. I suppose before I go into my journey, most of you would have been able to come into the gallery if we'd been at the gallery. So what I wanted to do first was to share my screen, but I admit I'm a novice at this, did practice today, and show you just a very quick walkthrough of the gallery. I note that I did record this on my camera earlier, not today, and then we stitched it together today. But it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But it only goes for just over a minute. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and just show you a bit about the gallery first. So hopefully you got a bit of a feel for the exhibition. But yes, forgive me, it was done on my video camera. But I wanted to be able to share that with you for those that haven't managed to get into the gallery space yet. And hopefully you can before it finishes this Sunday on the 13th. So how did I get here sitting in front of you on International Women's Day on a panel discussion? Well, it has been a journey of self-discovery and self-love. So I've always been creative, but it wasn't until much later in my life that I felt that I needed to do more than just create a little bit on the side. I arrived in Sydney after my first degree and straight into a full-time job out of uni. So fast forward through a career in kids, and I'm sitting in the car park after a weekly art class, and I turned to my friend and said, "This is it. My youngest is going to high school, and this is my chance to follow my dreams of being an artist." I realized I was missing out on loving myself. And when I make art, it feels like home. So I secretly applied to art school and eagerly awaited the news. I didn't tell my family because I knew I wasn't living my true life, but I wasn't ready to actually tell them yet. So art connects with the real me, and now I express myself with emotive fiber artworks, combining both my love of textiles and of art. I'm a seeker and an observer, and my lived experience and research feeds into my art practice. My first solo show was in 2018. It was called Recalibrate, and it was at Galway Lane Clove, so not very far away from where I am today. And I was exploring being overwhelmed in the everyday. I chose deliberately to limit my palette to black and white and blue and white. Now, the black and white reference the fact that actually some people see the world in a very black and white way. I had soft sculptures, a video installation, photography, works on paper, and also some other quite provoking installations as well. And all of these artworks were working through the concept of being overwhelmed in the everyday. It related to a time in my life when family members were overwhelmed and I was overwhelmed as being a carer. And I was trying to make sense of it and to share this experience with others. I wanted to destigmatize and create conversations about being overwhelmed and about mental health. And so this is in 2018. I know the world has changed a bit and there's a bit more talking about mental health, but this was in 2018. And it was a moving exhibition, and I was exploring the visual and the emotional body. And look, actually, some people cried when they went through this exhibition. It really brought up things for them. Others shared their stories with me about their own journeys with mental health issues, and others of journeys of their loved ones. And I was recalibrating both myself, society, my family as well. And so following on from that exhibition, my journey with my family continued. And I've got a journal entry here that I wanted to share with you. And it's a bit of a light bulb moment, really. And I've written, people, particularly mothers and carers, can get lost in the everyday and forget about the self. In a particularly challenging part of my life, I was out of balance and not taking care of myself. My self-worth was low and I was overwhelmed. And I went on a journey of self-discovery and started to take small steps to rebuild myself. I sought out my inner voice, my inner canary, and it was a struggle, both internally and externally, actually, to rediscover myself. I reconnected to the bush and to nature and started to listen to my inner voice. And art played a major role for me in being able to actually rediscover myself. I remember actually going away overnight and thinking, gosh, I don't know what to do. And I thought, what I need to do is to write down all the things that bring me joy and the things I want to bring into my life. So I wrote down a list of all the things that I like to do. And then I decided I needed to actually make sure that those things were part of my life. And I went about actually making that happen. So this led me on a journey of self-discovery and delving into the self, which followed on actually into my next exhibition, which was called Songs of Myself. And that was at White Rhino Art Space, which is in St Leonard's. And I was instrumental in the startup of White Rhino Art Space. But now I have actually chosen to follow my art practice, and that gallery is still there in St Leonard's, run by some friends. So Songs of Myself was about seeking and healing for me and connecting with others and sharing my story through art and the act of art making. I was leaning into my inner canary and exploring things that made me sing. And I was also raising the flag about society needed to think about these issues broader. I mean, mental health and self-worth were there. There were flags everywhere. There was such a uptake of prescription medicine, and I could see it when I was visiting with my children to different helpers, that basically it was more than just me. This was, the canary in the coal mine for society. And I drew on my own personal exploration into self and positive affirmations. I researched some really inspiring people. One of them was Marissa Peer, and she's a UK hypnotherapist and public speaker. And Brene Brown, who's an American researcher and storyteller as well. There was also Sarah Wilson, who's an Australian, and she was a presenter on MasterChef, 12 or 13 years ago when it first started. But she's also instrumental behind the I Quit Sugar. And she wrote a book called First We Make the Beast Beautiful, which is actually about her journey with anxiety and her own health as well. There was a man called Johan Hari, who was an investigative journalist from the UK who wrote this amazing book, The Lost Connections. And I've also got information and inspiration from Glennon Doyle, who's an American who shared her story as well, and inspires others along the journey. And so for me, I feel that the words "I'm enough," which Anne mentioned earlier, are at the core of self-worth. And I acknowledge the yearning for something. And I think that acceptance of the self begins with and starts with "I am enough." And that became part of my art practice, being able to actually use those words as a motive within my art practice. I also draw on the canary motif, which I've mentioned earlier, but it relates to both the miner's canary, or the canary in the coal mine, which was in relation to toxic gases in the coal mines. I think even as late as the 70s, they were using canaries physically in cages, carrying them into the coal mines. And if the canaries basically died, then basically they knew that they also needed to leave because the gases were too toxic. But it also, for me, the canary also relates to the inner canary, that inner voice or inner knowing, and following what makes your heart sing. So it has those two meanings for me. And it's about doing things that bring you joy and vitalize you. It's not about changing jobs or friends and moving house, but seeing yourself and finding something that you're passionate about, you know, that actually lights you up and vitalizes you. That's how I see the inner canary. And through my art, I'm sharing hope and validation that you are enough. And so we're kind of here now at More Myself, A Journey of Self-Love, which is basically the exhibition that I had to walk through earlier with you. And I was taking the exhibition a little bit further, and I was taking those concepts a little bit further with this current show, because the more you discover about yourself, the more you become yourself. I'm a sensitive soul, and as a carer, I went on my own mental health journey. I lost myself for a while, and I forgot to take care of myself. And you know how to say in the airplane, you need to put on your oxygen mask first, and then you help others. Well, eventually that sunk in, and I realized I needed to put on my oxygen mask. So the care and love you give your family, your partner, and your friends is the care and love you deserve as well. I've got a poem about the exhibition I thought I would share with you. So, which actually kind of encapsulates the whole exhibition really for me. Pause, breathe, a moment passes. I pause for a moment to still the scattered chaos of my mind. A thought comes forward. Wistfully, I'm thinking that if only I had time, I would take time for myself. And the words "I'm enough" and "I love myself" are now two affirmations I use regularly to remind myself that I'm important. I'm exploring and embracing myself. I feel that there's a sort of strength in vulnerability, and I hope that by sharing my story, you can move forward in your story and find hope and gratitude and inspiration, or even validation in your own story and your own journey. For a while, I thought it was just me, but I realized actually it's not only me.
In a little container.
So I wanted to show you one of the artworks in a little bit more detail and talk to you about it. Let me just share my screen again, just make sure I have got that set up. Share screen. I think it's going to be this one. I think I'm supposed to open them. I'm just waiting for them to open. I think maybe I did something wrong there. Oh, here they go. Okay. So this is the soft sculpture.
Tracy, we can't see it yet. So I think you'll need to stop sharing and then reshare, because then you'll be able to, because you've opened it.
Oh, okay. Sheen Square. Okay. Share. How's that?
Perfect. We can see it full screen now.
So I wanted to talk to this soft sculpture, which Anne mentioned earlier. And as you can see, it says, "I love myself." So I wanted to tell you about the journey of this particular artwork. It was really, really challenging. So I was originally thinking that I was going to make a soft sculpture. And I thought, yep, I'm going to make a soft sculpture. It's going to be really large. And I was going to write the words, "I am enough." And there was something inside me that said, Tracy, you've done this before. You actually need to do something more. And so it was like listening to my inner voice, and I could really feel it. Like, you can't see me rubbing my stomach, but I could really feel it inside my chest that actually I needed to do more. I'd read this book by a guy called Kamal Ravikant, and he has, as one of his affirmations, the words, I love myself. And they got my heads going, oh, can I, should I, will I, can I write, I love myself? And so basically I thought, oh, actually, maybe I can. So I started on this, and I had to draft up a pattern, and I'm thinking bit by bit, it's growing on me, it's getting there. And I started to stitch it together. And I think I was almost sort of stitching myself together at the same time. And so basically, I knew I wanted to use denim. I knew that denim is an everyday fabric. It relates to across all generations, except my husband. He doesn't have any denim in his wardrobe, but the majority of people have denim in their wardrobe. And this is donated denim. So this also is includes the journeys and the stories of those other wearers as well, before I recycled the denim into a soft sculpture. And I've hand stitched all around the edges, which you can't see from the video as clearly, but I have actually hand stitched all of the words together with red thread. And they're kind of like blood, sweat and tears. And almost as you pull the thread, it's almost like it would crumble, because, you know, you can feel like that sometimes. And so for me, it wasn't until I really hung it in the gallery that I went, yes, I can actually do this. And when you put all the words, all the letters together, and you breathe into it, you go, yes, I can actually say, I love myself. But I just wanted to say there was a really difficult journey. And to sort of explain that journey, I've actually gotten another poem here. And it's basically, this artwork is called I Love Myself, of course. So the poem is, it's hard to say I love myself. It's hard to believe I love myself. I will practice. I am worth it. I love myself. And I hope that you can come into the gallery and be able to see this work in real life as well. Thanks, Anne.
Okay. Tracy, thank you so much for those words. I love the idea that the more that you discover about yourself, the more you actually find yourself, that you go to self. That was so beautiful. And I think we all have had moments in our lives, or continue to do so, where we're stitching ourselves together, just as you have done on that wall. I must say, when I saw that, it was initially, I loved it, but I found it quite confronting. It was interesting, the emotions that it drew with me, because it was almost something that I wanted to recoil. It was beautiful. I was drawn to it, but I also wanted to recoil, because it's almost so hard to almost own that space.
Yes,
loving yourself, with all us, you know, being, all of us just being sort of the slightly, you know, shabby, crusty denim, poorly stitched together that we are, but we're also so perfect with that,
and resilient,
and so resilient. And you know, the fact that you shared your hope, you know, you felt that sharing hope and validation through art, that you are enough, is so important. And that leads me really to Elise Slater, who is the founder of Living Softly. And if we look at that image, that is, you know, it's a soft sculpture that's all about living softly. And Elise's practice is using art therapy to help people who are struggling, in particular those in the field of eating disorders, body image, and self-development. And this has come about through Elise's own journey. And I would love you to be able to share a little bit with us about that at the moment, Elise. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel tonight. I feel so moved by the stories that have been shared so far. So I'm here, I guess, today in my capacity as an art therapist. Tracy invited me along to speak a little bit to that, and I guess first, it's amazing to see those images from your work, Tracy, and just the way I guess some of what you've got on display in the gallery there is what, as an art therapist, I hope to help facilitate people in finding their own way, using creativity for healing and for finding deeper connection to themselves too. So it's beautiful to see an exhibition that sort of illustrates that so beautifully as well. So I'm Elise, I'm an art therapist and practicing here on Gadigal land known as Sydney. So I work both with clients one-to-one on Zoom and at my studio in Chatswood. And I was also the art therapist in the eating disorders unit at Wesley Missions Hospital in Ashfield for 3 years as well. So facilitating a group art therapy space for clients there. So I do specialize as an art therapist, I guess, in eating disorders, body image issues, self-worth, and some of the things that we're talking about on the panel here today. And that for me is a coming full circle of my own journey through an eating disorder as a teen. And I guess now I find myself in a space offering what my younger self needed to other people, both from teens, but all the way through to adults as well. And I think that's a response to the very clinical models of treatment that were available to me when I was going through that. And I felt the need for something, I guess, more holistic, person-centered, because I didn't have the words to talk about it when I was a young person. I think if I'd sat as I did with a talk therapist, it wasn't something I could put into words at the time. And I went on a long journey after that experience. I actually went and studied fashion design at university, which maybe sounds ironic given its impact on eating disorders and self-worth, but that's exactly why I went into it, because I was furious with that industry and the pressures it placed on women, and I wanted to change that. So it was really that drove me to my studies, and my studies culminated in my final year dissertation around why does the fashion industry idealize this very narrow, slender ideal of femininity. So part of the first stages of my journey to self-worth were really re-educating myself. So I'd say reclaiming my mind from the grasp of all of these images and forces of our culture that diminish us and make money from our insecurities. And like at the time when we're trying to work out who we are in our life, particularly when we're in our teens, it's pretty hard to do that when the noise in the outside world is so loud and so oppressive, and the image, it's even more so now that image-based culture is more intense than it's ever been. So so my first stage was doing that. And just to mention one of the amazing women mentors, I guess, who had an impact on my life then was, I referenced the work of Dr. Susie Orbach, who wrote Fat is a Feminist Issue in the 1970s in that dissertation. And I then went and lived in London, and I went to one of her talks and said, "Hey, Susie, I'd love to assist you, however that may be." And she's an amazing woman. And she said, "Sure." And Susie was doing great things. She was taking Weight Watchers to court for, peddling a service that essentially has no success rate. We were protesting at London Fashion Week, asking them to show more diverse representations of bodies on the catwalks. And so for me, that was partly taking back my own power. I think it was, I want to talk back to these industries that only have a one-way conversation with me. Because I guess back then those industries were also ruled by fashion magazines and things. There was no two-way conversation, which is increasingly possible now with platforms like Instagram, for us to talk back and demand better from companies. So yes, to cut a long story short, that was stage one, sort of the re-education and reclaiming of my mind and body from some of the forces that had affected me. And I had a big journey. I came back, worked in fashion, and another, I guess, really pivotal moment was a trip to India and Nepal, where I did a deep dive into Buddhist studies and was able, I guess, doing a 6-week meditation retreat over there to get some perspective and also drop all of those things that I attached to my identity. So in that retreat, we had no access to the internet, to our normal clothes. No one over there knew who I was. So all of those things that I identified with sort of dropped away. And I met an art therapist when I was in India as well. So when I came back to Australia after that pivotal trip, I studied art therapy. And I guess 20 years after my own eating disorder, I'd kind of been on this journey, and only then did I feel ready to sort of offer back something to that community, like a different healing modality. So yeah. I can talk more to what art therapy is, but yeah, maybe that's down the track a little bit. So that's a little bit about how I find myself both on this panel and doing the work that I do with amazing people, using art and creativity to connect to themselves in deeper ways.
I'll just unmute myself. Elise, thank you for sharing that extraordinary journey. I think so many of us, even though those of us who haven't had your lived experience, can really resonate with, it really resonates with, just as you said, the influence of popular culture and media, of which, you know, I'm part of. I work in that space. That is very reductionist, that that doesn't, as you say, allow a two-way conversation, because even now with as you say, that perhaps there is more open opportunities for conversations because of things like social media and what have you, it still tends to be a little bit of an echo chamber as well. And unless you're actually sort of looking for, you know, your particular tribe in there, you can actually stumble on areas that isn't necessarily particularly healthy. And I'd love to find out a little bit more, deep dive a bit more in question time into how you actually use art to help people, and women in particular, have those breakthrough moments. I think perhaps somebody who might have some very good insights on that is Angela Raspass. Now, Angela is, like all of us, she's Sydney based and has also, like all of us, no doubt, had a very sort of interesting and complex journey to get to the point where we are the women that we are today. And so Angela, you know, she's a bit Sydney based, she's a business mentor, author, a self-worth educator, and she supports women to step into their next chapter and do the work that they're here for. And I certainly appreciate Angela, because when I shared my story of 10 years, she has also been riding shotgun with me a little bit in that space. And I certainly know that her insights, her empathy, and her experience has been very profound for me. But you know, like all of us, she didn't necessarily arrive in a spot that she is now, in a very clear, linear, or should I say, smooth path. And so, Angela, I'd like you just to share us a little bit of your journey, and you know, being starting the Centre of Self-Worth in Sydney, which I'm intrigued and really eager to learn more about, how that becomes the service that you want to give to other people. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, and thank you, Tracy, for bringing us all together. I don't think I have yet met a single person whose ride has been smooth. I came across a brilliant quote a wee while ago that really summed our worlds up, I think, and it said how life is lived forward but understood backwards. And so we can look back with what I call hindsight, which I define as compassionate reflection, and we can see how all the bumps in the road and all the detours and the craziness actually led us to exactly where we're supposed to be today. And you know, listening to the journeys that you've been through, and when you were letting go of those labels and actually claiming who you were underneath them, because you discovered when they were all taken away that you were still there. And Elise, listening to, I love that concept of a pivotal trip. which was when you were ready. You know, what do they say? When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And the idea of, I think, soapbox moments and fire moments. So something that really outrages you or excites you, the thing that you're drawn to, has got so much to talk to us about, you know, what our purposes are and what we're here to do. And why did self-worth become my real soapbox moment, my bugbear? Well, it's because I didn't have any. And I didn't recognize what was happening to me until I used that hindsight many, many years later. A huge part of my story, we heard Tracy speaking of Brené Brown. Is there anyone here who's not familiar with Brené Brown's work? I think, no, I can't see any shaking of heads. If you're interested in this topic and creativity and self-worth and self-love, it's likely that you've stumbled across her work in some form. But Brené talks very much about the connection between shame, addiction, and self-worth. And that's really the fireplace where all of my interest in this subject came together. She talks about that shame is a social construct. You can't shame yourself, but things happen to us as we go through this life where we doubt that we're enough and we disconnect from our sense of self-worth. And we hear other people saying things, or perhaps even imagine that they're judging us, and this chips away at our self-worth. It's things like the culture that we're swimming in. And Elise, you spoke to that so beautifully with the reductionist way in which our body image is dealt with fashion and so much else that we are bathing in. And it's conditioning how we're told as women we're meant to be. I'm actually re-listening at the moment to Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. And some of her surveys basically said that women are supposed to be small and quiet and pretty and slim and compliant. Those are some of the things that we're supposed to be a well-regarded woman, where men are supposed to be dominant and strong and never show weakness and etc. etc. They are stuck in boxes as much as we are. But that idea of shame and addiction coming together, some of the stories that I experienced and the things that I told myself as a teenager led me to feeling incredibly low in that area of confidence, and what I now realize is actually self-worth. And when you feel that your core just doesn't measure up, when it is simply not enough, it's quite common for you to find ways in which to comfort yourself, in which to take the edge off the pain, in which to be able to show up without fear. And for me, I chose alcohol. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was really getting its claws into me. You know, at 16, 17, 18, when I could now show up at a party feeling enough because I had liquid courage coursing through my veins, I didn't know what it was actually doing to me long term. And it all came to a head when I was 37 years of age here in Australia and realized that I was no longer able to choose to drink or not to drink. And I actually ended up in detox, and I've been in the recovery movement for almost 16 years now. And it was that fire, actually recognizing and understanding that I wasn't a bad person who had to get good. I was an unwell person who needed to get well. And that's when my journey began 16 years ago, when I actually then started to get the tools to unpack why had I believed all of these stories that told me that I wasn't enough. In fact, that I was defective in some way. And I was incredibly fortunate to have mentors and a community around me that loved me back to life and allowed me to actually claim the understanding that there is nothing wrong with who I am. That helped me understand that this is something missing from so many women. And where that understanding came from was the mentoring work that I was doing with business owners, these incredible women who were doing fabulous things, but always doubted themselves. And we'd work together and we'd talk about how they could pursue their dreams further or become more visible or do lots of different things. And the ideas were there, their talent was there, but then they didn't do it. And why was that? Because time and time again, it came down to not believing that they could. And that was the self-worth disconnection. And so I really got tired of seeing these awesome women who weren't expanding. Now, this is where there may be a bit of a contradiction, because I am enough, yes, but I still want to unlock my more. So I've yet to meet a woman who doesn't feel as though there's more possible for her. And more doesn't mean I'm going to take over the world and, you know, be a multi-millionaire and, you know, change millions of lives. It can mean that you are going to change your corner of the world, but something holds you back. Well, to me, that's the self-worth disconnection, because when we understand and fully own the uniqueness that is each of us and allow that to be expressed, that's when the world reverberates with our personal power. I want to read to you what I define self-worth as and see how it feels. I want you to feel it, not just hear it, if that makes sense. Self-worth is a deep appreciation of and connection to your unique self that enables you to choose to contribute to the world at 100% of your personal power in all areas of your life. Okay, choose to contribute until you're connected and really understand the unique individual that you are. You can't choose to contribute at your full capacity. Something will always hold you back. And I want you to understand the difference between worth and value, because some people get mixed up between those two. Your worth is what you were born with. No one holds a baby up and says, "What have you done for me lately?" Like, you just are born with this absolute innate worth. And then over time, and you look at small children, they are so confident in their skins. They have no doubt of their wholeness. But then society chips away at us over time and we begin to doubt it. But your worth is just obscured. Okay, it's still there. It's the competition, the comparison, the conditioning, the culture, all of that stuff which is chipped away. So that never changes. By contrast, your value is different. The value that you create for the world is influenced by market forces. Like at the moment, no one's valuing water in Sydney, for example, because there's something weird happening out there in the weather. So the market can change the value of what you have to give, but it never touches your worth, never. So when we were speaking, when we were at the opening night, we were lucky to get to the gallery without our swimsuits on and actually immerse ourselves in the beautiful work that you've created, Tracy. And when I was there, I shared a little acronym, which I'd love to share with you tonight before we then continue on with the panel. And the idea is how you anchor yourself in self-worth. And this is about practices. Because what I did was I looked backwards and worked out, how did I go from basically thinking that I was just worthless to thinking I'm okay today, I am enough. I can say without choking on the words that I do love myself in denim. And these anchor pieces are really, really helpful. So the first one, the A, is appreciate. Okay, and this is about appreciating your uniqueness. And that is not just off the top of my tongue. This is a thing. Every one of us has a different way to contribute to the world. You're not less than or better than anyone else. You're equal to. Okay, but it's your unique expression, which is what we're after. So A is appreciate. N is no numbing. Okay, now my particular brand of numbing was alcohol. Unfortunately, when you numb the bad feelings, the scary feelings, you also numb the good. So life becomes very grey. But it doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be busyness. It can be perfectionism. It can be shopping. It can be exercise. I didn't get that one, unfortunately. But there's many different ways in which you can numb yourself. But don't do that, because you need to feel to be able to deal with things and to be able to heal. You need to feel and be truly present to contribute. Then we have C, which is compassionate self-talk. Before I appreciated self-worth, I used to rip shreds off myself in my head. And I think it's safe to say that you may do the same sometimes. That inner voice, that's living inside your head, you wouldn't speak to another person the way you sometimes speak to yourself. So we want to flip that. We want compassionate encouragement so that you know you are a safe harbor for yourself when you stretch out of your comfort zone. Because things don't always go according to plan. But if you have a compassionate reaction and response to that, then you're more likely to try again. Okay. The H stands for higher power. Now, this doesn't need to have a religious undertone to it if that doesn't feel good to you. But if it does, hallelujah. little pun there. But for me, it was nature. Nature was my form of higher power. The idea is to connect to something bigger than yourself, something that makes you feel a part of instead of apart from. So just practice that concept of your version of spirituality. The O is open-minded. Stay open to other people's perspectives, new experiences, new learnings. I thought I had learned quite a lot in the last 16 years, but my goodness, there is so much more that I'm being exposed to now. So stay curious, follow the breadcrumbs that interest you, and keep on learning. This is about growth, not improvement. Big difference between the two, because you're enough, but growth is exciting. And the last one, the R, is rituals. How do you ground yourself, anchor yourself overall into the day? So a ritual could be as simple as every morning there's a cup of tea and 10 minutes in the sun. Every evening, there's 3 things you're grateful for and 1 thing you're proud of. It can be just pausing during the day and connecting with your breath, because the world around you is completely nutty and you just need to stop and pause for a moment. So what rituals can you bring into your world that will anchor you into that sense of I am absolutely enough? Because if all of us had that opportunity to contribute at our full, or choose to contribute at our full capacity, can you imagine what this world could look like? It would be magnificent. And so I have so much more I could talk about, but I will be quiet for now because I get excited about this stuff. But if you can anchor yourself and move forward, I cannot wait to see what can unfold in your next chapter when you know that you are enough. So thank you, Anne, and thank you guys, and let's panel as opposed to party.
So I'd love to throw it open now to some questions, but I guess to get started, I want to bring it full circle back to Tracy, because she's the one why we're here, why she's the person that we're here. So I guess for you, Tracy, you talk so much about your art, how it reflects you know, your journey to self-worth, but this specific show, you've done shows before, but what does this show mean to you?
So thanks, Anne. Oh, and thanks, Angela, too. That was amazing. I was making notes. Luckily, we're in a panel, really, so then I could make notes. It'd be rude if I was sitting in front of you making notes, but I could do it secretly on a panel. So what does the show mean to me? So I suppose it means a lot, really, and I feel very proud of the show. I have been working on the artworks for mostly the last 12 months, really, and I think that even the I love myself statement basically was getting myself out of, or further than I am enough, into I love myself. And I am a work in progress. And I think that basically the show for me is about becoming more myself with time, with research, with creating. I'm able to actually become more Tracy, and I suppose, yeah, that's what it means to me. But I think with art, it also allows me to say things I couldn't really say out loud. And on my journey, realizing that I wasn't the only one having this kind of self-discovery, and I wanting to actually share my story with the idea that I might also inspire others and remind them about their inner canary and about their self-worth and about actually taking time for themselves and taking the opportunity to self-care, because I know that that's something that I forgot to put on my oxygen mask, but I really needed to put on my oxygen mask.
Wonderful. And because we're obviously not in a room with a glass of wine where we can bounce these, you know, ideas and questions around, I would really encourage anybody who's got a question to pop it in the chat box, because it's obviously a little harder when we're all, you know, turning microphones on and off and not wanting to interrupt anybody else. So please, we'd love some questions. Elise, how is self-love a key part of the way you work with clients who may really be filled with self-loathing rather than self-love?
Yes, well, even I, someone who feels like they've journeyed through that, when Tracy did put up those words, I love myself, there was still something in me that was still confronted by that, even still. So, and yes, you're right, I work with a lot of clients for whom, yeah, may have a sense of feeling unlovable in the world, by others and even by themselves. And as Angela said, to people, a lot of clients for whom that inner voice is highly critical and quite violent, in terms of the words it uses internally on you know, my client's internal voice talking to their own body. If that was spoken aloud, it would sound quite violent if it was spoken out loud. And I guess part of what can happen in an art therapy session sometimes is, because the aim when I hold that space is to hold a really safe, non-judgmental space, is that clients may for the first time start to speak out loud, or express through art out loud some of that inner dialogue. And also what can happen is when someone begins to make marks on a paper, the inner critic can pop up very loudly at that moment. It can freeze them from putting down a dot on a paper as well. And in art therapy, we're never judging the artwork, and that's explained at the beginning of the session, that it's about the process, not the output of the art. And the client is invited, as they create, to notice what internal dialogue comes up, to notice what's happening to them. So a little bit like what you might do in meditation, but meditation's not for everyone, is actually being the observer of your own inner experience and of these things that we may say to ourselves, and we don't even realize that it's not okay until it's spoken aloud. We get away with it when it's on the inside, but when the light is shone on it, we can see it for, you know, the monster that it is. And I think when it's brought into the light, it can't fester in the same way inside of us. So also in art therapy, I guess we're trying to untangle art from achievement, because it's not, you know, because it's beautiful to see Tracy's exhibition because it's disengaged from ego, but a lot of art in our modern culture and the life of the artist is an egocentric, look at me, I'm a fabulous artist. And, you know, there's a lot of that. And we grow up in a school system where people are told, oh, that's not how you draw, and you've got 80 out of 100. And so all of us are born creative, but that just gets shut down. And so to disengage from judging our own artwork, I guess, is starting that disengaging from like external approval, needing to please teachers or put it on Instagram or whatever, and just to actually connect with our internal experience and express that and notice what comes up for us and start to create a connection with our own inner life. And what Angela said about that anchor, it was an image that came up for me today when I was thinking about this panel, was the idea that dropping anchor for me is about sort of dropping in and being able to dialogue with our inner life, with the images that live inside of us, the feelings inside of us, the colors, the vibrations in our body, developing a relationship with our body and how it speaks to us, because it does, but a lot of us are numbing it through many of the techniques that you mentioned, Angela, and some others, and eating disorders obviously as well on top of that. So that metaphor of like the boat and needing to drop anchor, because if we haven't dropped an anchor, all of the forces of our culture, of other people, will sway us off course, and we'll get lost, or we'll follow someone else's, we'll get caught in their stream and drift off. So the importance of learning how to drop that anchor into ourselves, to check in on ourselves with kindness, ideally as well. That is the anchor that will stop us getting swayed by all of those forces outside of us. And I wish we taught young people how to do that earlier, because the forces are so strong out there. And in art therapy, that's kind of, you know, lots of things can happen out of sessions, but one of the things would just be learning how to check in with yourself and learning how to dialogue with your own inner imagery and feelings and create a stronger connection with the felt sense, with the mythical, with your own narrative, and to start noticing, yeah, with gentleness, what's going on for you.
Thank you, Elise. I am going to go to Andrew in a moment, but I have a question here from Regular. She wants to know exactly what you mean by living softly, and I wrote that down as well. It felt like a warm hug when you said it, but I guess I would like to know a little bit more about how one can live softly.
Yes, so live softly. When I was on that Buddhist retreat in India, I had this moment, like everything that the Buddhist teacher was telling us just was sort of resonating with me on such a deep level. And anyway, the Buddhist teacher on this retreat, he told a proverb, and it's a Buddhist proverb, and it's about, don't try to cover the whole world with leather to make it soft to walk on, just cover the soles of your own feet. And for me, that was also, like, I think particularly in Western culture, we're taught bigger is better and try to make an impact. And it was a reminder for me, I guess, just to do what I can in this world. And actually I want to leave this world, if not better than I found it, then to leave no mark or no trace. So yeah, the words live softly came to me after that, and hence have become my business name. But yeah, it's, I guess, yeah, I haven't explained that very well.
No, not at all.
You're traveling gently through the world.
The image of not covering the world with leather, but just covering your feet so you can walk softly, I think is, it really sums it up. Maureen Hawes, she had a comment for you, Angela, which I think is also really partly question, where you know, around the concept of temporary escapes for many of us. You know, I think when we're in a state of escape and we're trying to disconnect, it can sometimes feel like a permanent state, and it's hard to believe that it could actually end. Hence the beauty of your concept of rise. Perhaps you'd like to, you know, dig a little deeper into that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laurie, it can feel so much like when you're in the middle of it, it's almost impossible to imagine what it's going to be like on the other side, or even that there is another side, another way out of here. And that's where, see, the two concepts that I'm sharing here, anchor is a practice. It's something you do on an ongoing basis to strengthen your connection to self-worth. Rise is what you do when you're smacked sideways, when you know there's a story in your head that this thing isn't working out, or everyone's judging me, or a really bad thing is happening, whatever that bad thing might be. And it's to be able to catch yourself, recognize how you're feeling. Like, it feels different for everyone. For me, when my self-worth is disconnecting, it's like a slam in the belly, and it's like a constriction of the throat. I find it hard to speak. I guess my truth is a way of doing it. So I've got to recognize when that's going on, and then I have to investigate what's caused it. I literally have a dialogue with myself. It's like, okay, you're feeling crap. Excuse my French. You're feeling crap. Why are you feeling crap? And because I've practiced this a lot, I can usually, not always, but usually go, oh, okay. So when that happened over there, and I'll give you a specific example. So I was at a theatre event, and I was chatting with some people beforehand, a couple of friends, and I mentioned how I'm trying to eat more plant-based, like 80% plant-based, to try and eat less processed, etc. Really committed to that, to lose some weight, yes, but to feel healthier. And this person said to me, oh, that sounds great, but what about all that Diet Coke you drink? I mean, like, that's just going to cancel anything good that you do. Okay, and they weren't being nasty. They were just like, just say, because I do drink a lot of Diet Coke. And I didn't deal with it at the time, but later that night I was feeling really crap, and I recognized what I was feeling. Then I investigated it, and I went, it's from that comment. Okay, so I had to separate myself from the story. Okay, so the story that I'm hearing, that I'm telling myself is, I suck. It doesn't matter what I try and do, I'm never going to be healthy. So why even, like, that's the story. So I have to separate from that story. Okay, and then I have to embrace a new possibility. Okay, and so again, that compassionate self-talk. Okay, yes, you do drink a fair amount of Diet Coke, because that's what I took up when I stopped drinking alcohol. This, by the way, just to let everyone know, is non-alcoholic champagne, in case you're going, what is that woman doing? So I then had to embrace this new possibility, which was that, yeah, but if I start to eat more healthily, that's got to be good for me. And I feel really positive about that. So those were the steps of RISE. Recognize that I'm feeling crappy, investigate what potentially has contributed to that, separate myself from that story, because if I don't, I'll spiral down, and then embrace a new possibility. And these, again, that's a tool to use in the moment. But the reason I can usually rise is because I've done those rituals of anchoring. And thank you, Elise, for talking about anchoring, because yeah, that's what it is. It is being anchored in your self-worth so that you don't get buffeted too much, because life's going to throw curveballs. It just does, and you can't control them, but you can control your response to them. Long answer, but hopefully that was useful, Maureen, so that you could see, you know, an exact situation where I was using RISE to help keep myself anchored in self-worth.
Angela, the question for me, I think for people, there's, you know, to differentiate the difference between worth versus value, which you did so beautifully when you said, you know, worth is something that we as little babies are born with, but value is something that is imposed on us. I think people also struggle with the distinction between self-esteem versus self-worth. Would you like to unpack that a little bit for us?
Absolutely, because self-esteem has been what's been thrown at us so much. Like, we've got to raise the self-esteem of our children. We've got to raise our own self-esteem. The very simple difference between the two is that self-esteem is about external validation and approval. It's like self-esteem is given to us through the approval of others, where self-worth comes from within. So my self-esteem can be taken in a moment. I can be feeling really good about what I'm wearing, and then someone goes, "You're going out in that?" And like, boom, it's gone instantly. Okay, when my self-worth does not rely on somebody else approving of me. So that's the difference. Self-esteem is like a sugar hit. Okay, it's like a sugar hit. It's a high, lasts a little while, but it can be battered sideways. Self-worth is sort of like, what should we call it? Low GI by comparison. So it lasts a lot longer, and you have the reins when it comes to deciding that you are worthy. So that's how I see the difference.
Tracy, I think we're all hearing today about the importance of maintaining some discipline around self-love. How do you do that?
Oh, thanks, Anne. That's a very good question. I suppose I think I said earlier that I had gone away for the weekend by myself, and I'd written down all these things that bring me joy, and then tried to bring them into my life. And I think maybe it's discipline that can help me also to love myself, because when I am lit up doing things that I'm passionate about, I feel joyful and I have more to give to others as well. So some of the things that I do for myself, I like to go for a walk. I've got a regular cycling group that I cycle with every week, although it's been raining. I haven't been cycling for a week or so. But I also do yoga, and I create. And I think by feeding my soul, I start to love myself more, and I kind of grow with that. So I think that is about a part of my self-worth and my self-love is that sort of self-care kind of component. I think it's all sort of like get tied in to actually honoring me, basically. And I also creating. So for me, the process of making art allows me to sort of sit with myself, and then I start to appreciate myself more. And so a lot of my artworks have got hand stitching in them. And I find the process of hand stitching quite meditative and calming. And I hand stitch into paper, which is quite a deliberate act, really, in that you, if you were to stitch into fabric, it would actually heal if you've made an error. But in paper, it's basically once you've pierced a hole, you've got a hole in the paper, and it won't heal as easily as it would in fabric. And I think those are the ways that I sort of start to love myself. But another way actually is as I journal, and I actually do use the affirmations that I am enough and I love myself on a daily basis. basically to build that within myself.
Creating those neuro superhighways.
Yeah.
Because we are what we tell ourselves. I think, you know, you said something really important there, that we often prioritize, especially, you know, in whether, you know, when we're caring for other people around us. And I don't necessarily mean that in a family situation, but also in a work or in a friendship way. We often schedule the care of others before we schedule it in ourselves. And I certainly now have, like you, drawn lists of, well, what are the things that actually, you know, bring me joy and fill my cup? And one of those is around art. And so I've rediscovered ceramics, and but I now am finding I'm having to schedule that into my calendar as a discipline, to say, okay, well, you know, tomorrow you have 2 hours to do ceramics, and to be brave enough and centered enough in what I do to then actually knock back clients, and not feel that I need to say, oh, sorry, I can't do that because I'm doing pottery. It's say, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I'm already booked and already scheduled that. I feel like I'm asking all the questions, and I know probably even if the audience doesn't have any questions, the panel possibly has great questions to ask of each other. Angela, is there any question you would like to ask either Tracy or Elise?
Well, there's actually a couple of questions have just popped up just as you said that, so the timing was perfect. Regular asks, what are everyone's little daily rituals to connect with yourselves and your value? What can we incorporate into our days? I'll tackle that question if I may.
Can I say, people, pop it in the chat box, what works for you?
Absolutely. So daily rituals, I like to think of the bookends of your day and the park benches of your day. So the bookends are how you start your day and how you end your day. And really be careful not to go with perfectionism here, so a little bit gentleness. But so on an ideal morning for me, it is the cup of tea, it is the Daily Calm app, and it is doing some what I call genius mind writing. This was something that was given to me by a mentor, a spiritual mentor I worked with, where you literally write, genius mind, what would you have me know today? And then you free write, you just see what comes out the end of your pen. It's quite interesting to see what comes out of the end of that pen sometimes. But Anne mentioned before that I'm an author, so I wrote a book in 2020, and I wrote a huge amount of it through that technique. Like, I knew I had a model and I had the topics I wanted to talk about. So I would literally in the morning, genius mind, could you give me a hand with chapter 3? And then I'd just write and see what came out. So that really grounds me. It's like, because your brain is not a filing cabinet. It's not meant to hold everything. Get your thoughts out on paper, and it gives you that little bit of space to separate from the story. I find that helpful. And in the evening, I set a gratitude list, and I really believe that. I had a very negative mindset when I was when I first moved into recovery. I thought the world sucked, and so did I. And so gratitude lists help you filter for the good, deliberately looking for the good every day, and it really, really shifts your mindset. And when you have a more positive mindset, you see more opportunities. So it's a great ritual. And a park bench can literally be pausing for 3 minutes and just looking at the sky. Like, I've got a beautiful window here with a big tree. I watch the birds. I just pause and I just watch these little birds for a few minutes, and I feel like I can breathe again. So those are a couple of things that I do. And I'm sure there's some other suggestions too.
Wonderful. Maureen asks, how can we as more mature ladies pass on our learnings and experience about self-worth to our younger sisters and daughters? And I'm just going to throw that open to the entire panel rather than anyone specific, to see what words of wisdom you can bring to share with us all, because I think we'd all like, you know, a few tips around that. And I certainly would, as I said, when, you know, I was busy negative labeling myself and feeling that I, you know, gone from being a great mother to bad mum.
I think, well, I'll start with that one. I feel that when women start to own their own self-worth, then that actually shines through to our sisters and to our daughters as well. So I feel that one thing we can do is start to actually look to ourselves and reframe the things we say about ourselves. Somebody that came into the art gallery said that they found themselves talking about their body shape to their daughters and realized, actually, I can't say that anymore. I need to actually be positive about my body, because then I'm feeding that onto my daughter. And another person said something along the lines of, they have this sort of inner critic. Actually, no, what they were talking about whether or not they should actually speak their mind, and they had always been actually quite quiet and had just been sort of nodding and going along with things. And this particular day, they decided to actually say what they were thinking, and thought that they would actually really be offending their daughter. And the daughter was really happily surprised that the mother actually spoke her true self. And so that was a really big learning, I think. So I think that as women, we need to speak our truth, and we need to actually reframe what we say about ourselves to others, how we look at our bodies, how we talk about ourselves to others. And as we shine, that will actually motivate and actually shine on our sisters and our daughters as well.
Lead by example. So absolutely. And I think what you say is it's very, especially as our daughters get older, is you have to break the tribal cycle, if you like, of a lot of that sort of, ingrained, almost in our DNA, sort of toxic attitudes towards ourselves that we can find ourselves inadvertently, passing on through our actions rather than our words. And, when it comes to that tribal cycle, you have to make a decision about, what bits of that you want to bring forward and what stops here, what actually gets consigned to the bin of history. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Angela, perhaps?
I was just going to type it in, but I can probably talk faster than I can type. One of the things around body image, because I'm a fuller figured woman. My daughter is also fuller figured and can absolutely feel completely crap by what she sees on Instagram. Elise, I'm sure you've heard this many times. So one of the things that I've encouraged her to do is to clean her Instagram feed. So to take out, unfollow anyone that makes you feel less than enough, and to actually follow some people that are more realistic, health at any size, and things like that. So, and that's actually helped me. And so that's all, I've shared that with Charlotte, and she's made some choices about who she's going to follow. The other one is what things that I listen to and that I read that I think will be beneficial. So I pass those on to my daughter with the, how do I say this, to communicate my belief that she can do this, that she's got this, that she can value herself, that she can make good choices, etc., etc. So I share my stories, but I also try and make space to listen as well, because she's got a lot of good stuff to share, and I learned from her as well. So I get enthusiastic, so it's hard sometimes not to sort of shove my opinion at her, and I'm learning to pull back a little bit. But those are a couple of things that have helped. Yeah, Maddie's just saying, yeah, that's been a game changer for me. Instead of my social media making me anxious and self-doubting, cleaning it up now makes me excited and inspired. Yeah, me too. It's made a huge difference.
And I think it's not only just about curating your social media, but it's also about curating all the other information you're getting. As being a journalist, I've been, I guess in a way, my drug of choice has been news. And so I would have called myself at times a news junkie. It's a bit hard not to be when you're working in network television. Not only everywhere you walk there's a screen, but even when you're sitting at your desk, you have, 5 feeds coming through. And I've certainly found, especially in the last 12 months, and certainly within the last 6 months, I've had to really break that doom scrolling, if you like, and actually, delete news apps. And because I was finding the first thing I was doing in the morning was, I'd open my phone, and some people would check Instagram or Facebook. I would be checking the international news feeds, and I realized it wasn't healthy for me. And so I've had to do an audit, or if you like, detox from my drug of choice, which has been international news. And fill it with lots of kind of cute dog videos at the moment. That's and gardening and pottery. I'm following so many people on pottery at the moment, which is great, because the whole very meditative process of creating with your hands, either whether it's myself or watching other people, that grounds me as well.
I'd like to share just my wish for that space, which doesn't
Yeah.
happen enough. But I think last year I went to a women's retreat, and probably most of the women were over 30, but there were a few helpers on the retreat who were young women in their 20s. And one of the processes we did on this retreat was to sit in a big circle of women in order of age. So from the youngest to the oldest woman in the circle. And it was just going around and sharing in that space. And the two youngest women who were at this retreat were in floods of tears at the end, hearing the stories of these older women. And it just strikes me there's not enough spaces in our modern world where young people and our elders and, you know, the perimenopausal and the menopausal women all sit together in a space and share stories. Like there's a real ageism and a real gap there. So while not enough of that exists, my wish for that is to cultivate more spaces where, women, but all people of different ages can sit together and just openly and honestly share. And so, yeah, I think we can talk about breaking down body image too, but breaking down that sort of ageism, as well, is a really important next step.
As being a mother of 3 daughters, one of the things that my girls have said to me is that I hadn't realised how powerful it was in terms of modelling it, is the really strong, supportive and open friendships that I have with women, especially since, you know, often as young girls, we've talked about, especially you so beautifully there, Elise, about the you know, the toxic influences they get from you know, being bombarded with social media and mainstream media, which can create tensions and confusions in friendship groups that then end up by bubbling over and you know, perhaps not creating the same sort of trust. And for my girls, you know, I've got to say that the army of wise women that I have around me, they said, is something that they really look up to and they aspire. You know, there was a beautiful, you know, it was once there was in cultures and tribes, you know, there was the notion of the child, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. The word crone had, you know, it's been turned into being something that's actually sort of, you know, creepy and scary, you know, because obviously things like Disney has got hold of that. But the crone was actually the wisest woman. She was the medicine woman, if you like. And I think I quite like the idea of becoming a bit of an old crone. So, okay.
I really like what Lindsay wrote in the comments there as well, that she finds her daughter and her daughter's friends far less judgmental and willing to embrace difference than her generation ever was. It's so refreshing to witness the diversity in their friendship groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media. I think you're absolutely that. You know, while we've talked negatively about social media, it has also become very, very powerful. And but as Angela says, sometimes, especially our younger girls, maybe need a little bit of support around how they actually curate what has become, you know, this sort of overwhelming behemoth. It's very hard for them to cut through. That's good. Okay. Caitlin Moran calls us hags. Yes, I love being an old hag, cranky, bolshy old hag. My oldest dog, Sugar, you know, she's become a bossy old lady. You know, she's become the boss lady dog, and I sort of think, be more like Sugar. You know, get up in the morning, and if you want to walk, you ask for it really loudly, and that's not a bad thing. Okay, Tracy, do you have any questions?
I do have a question. I actually wanted to ask a question of both Angela and Elise, but they're different questions. So the first one is to Elise. I understood that Elise was somehow involved in supporting other women in a charity, and I wanted to know a bit more about her charity. And then the other one was to Angela. I really wanted to know more about her self-worth clinic. So should we start with Elise first?
Sure. I think the other charity that you're speaking of is that same trip to India and Nepal. I guess a few things were birthed there, and so I'd quit my job in the fashion industry and didn't know what I was going to do next when I went on that trip. And so while I was on this hilltop in Kathmandu, I met a group of artisans there who work with women to train them in craft skills and making, particularly felting, and they support a leprosy home. So I, decided I was going to work with them. So that was a process of collaborating on designing some products with them. I guess this was 6 or 7 years ago now. And so that's also called Live Softly. You can find it online, but it's, they're felted, mainly laptop covers, because another passion of mine is sustainable design and ecologically thoughtful design in terms of living softly. So yeah, that's been an ongoing project of collaborating and has kept my connection, I guess, to Nepal alive as well, and meant pre-COVID I could keep going back there as well every so often to work with them. So yeah, that's my little craft project over there.
Wonderful. Angela, let us find out a little bit more about your Centre for Self-Worth.
Yeah, thank you for having the chance to be able to talk about it a little bit. It actually started as the Self-Worth Institute because I thought that self-worth is a bit soft. And so if I link the word institute to it, that'll toughen it up. And I tried to go with that and my inner voice kept going. So I changed it to the Centre for Self-Worth. And I actually intended to have a program running mid last year, but life got in the way. So where you can go at the moment, I'm actually just about to put the site on its own domain, but at the moment it is still under angelaraspass.com. And the thing to really, you can take a quiz there, but the RISE program is what's going to be there. And this is a program that takes you through the RISE that I spoke about. And it also helps you work out where you are on the self-worth continuum. And so you can literally just pop over here, pop in up here your details, and then once that program is ready, I will email everybody and say, okay, do you want to play? So, oh, and there was a photo. Sorry, Regular. It's I'm not sure if I get your pronunciation correct. You just go to angelaraspass.com, and then you'll see under Centre for Self-Worth the RISE program, and that will be a group program, because one thing I've definitely learned, a lot of the work that I do these days is informed by my experience in recovery. And recovery groups where you go to 12-step programs, 12-step meetings, people share their experience, strength, and hope. So you hear other people's experiences, you have the reflection to other people. I don't believe we can reclaim our self-worth in isolation. Like as we've heard tonight, the power of hearing other people's stories and recognizing ourselves in those stories, that's a huge part of the healing. It's a huge part of the connecting to your worth, because you see someone being seen and heard and understood is so important for us. And the greatest gift you can give another person is the gift of your attention. So the RISE program will be a group program, and hopefully one day we'll all be running away on retreat together, because retreats are sensational for transformation as well. So I can't give you a definite date, but watch this space, stay connected, and hopefully when the program runs, it'll be something that feels like a good connection for you. So yeah, that's my story.
Cool. Well, it's 7:30 now. I'm more than happy to keep going if anyone has any other questions, but we do understand that you do have a life and possibly things to do on an evening such as this. So I guess before I wrap up, Tracy, as the creator of so many things, including this wonderful evening that we're sharing tonight on the end of International Women's Day, is there anything that you'd like to finally share with us before we leave tonight?
I do want to say a big thank you to the panelists. I feel honoured that you all agreed to come and be here tonight, and I thank both the panelists and the audience for pivoting onto Zoom. I suppose I wanted to actually encourage people to come along to the exhibition. Part of my exhibition, which you guys didn't get to see tonight because of the weather, are 2 installations. And one of the installations is actually a series of paper feathers, and I'm encouraging people to write the words "I'm enough" on the feathers. And I showed you a video there. You may have seen the feathers. They say "I'm enough," but it's actually grown immensely for the last 2 weeks. And I'd like to be able to grow that further. And I think that if we all take the time to write the words, I am enough, it is actually setting us free and on a path of actually believing in ourselves as well. And the other installation that's part of the exhibition is actually a chair, where I invite you to actually take a moment and sit in the chair and look at yourself in the mirror. But I'd actually gotten some other volunteers to record their voices, and they're saying I'm enough, and it's actually quite a powerful installation. So my wish is that if you can't get to the gallery, that you actually write the words I am enough at home. But if you can get to the gallery, please come and do that and share in this collective affirmation, I am enough. And the exhibition finishes on the 13th, which is Sunday, so open 10 till 4 until Sunday the 13th. And a big thank you for all of the panelists and for the audience tonight. And I hope you stay safe and dry.